Welcome back to the Training Model Podcast. Today we will be discussing the big rocks, the most important things when it comes to squatting and deadlifting technique for performance outcomes, as well as diving a little bit deeper, not so much diving deeper, but just rehashing some of the ideas that we chatted about last week when it comes to mobility-based training, based off a couple of questions and conversations that I've had this week. So, as I've been doing, we're in week 5 of the mentorship, which this week is lower body lifting application. And the goal with week 5 and week 6 is to consolidate all of the ideas that we've unpacked throughout the course, throughout the mentorship, and start to put them in a way that is a little bit more practical, a little bit more coaching framework. And the main framework that I use for this is the sensory motor continuum. Which I'll recap quickly. Sensory motor at one end, which is the sensory end. This is what I like to think of as productive learning of positions. I very much subscribe to a motor control foundation when it comes to movement development, and that is that a lot of people don't actually have restrictions. A lot of people don't actually have limitations. They simply just don't actually know what we're asking them to do when we're getting them to express a position or feel a certain thing, or any of those sort of things. Obviously, certain positions, some people just will feel difficult and challenged in. There's some structural things that influence that. However, most people can find productive positions to train in, and it's our job as coaches to get them to understand that stuff. And that's what the sensory end of the sensory motor continuum is for. It's feeling based, so it's proprioception heavy. Generally, we are bringing the center of mass down towards the ground somewhere. We're opening up the base of support. We're allowing more expression of movement so that clients can feel certain things. They can feel joint spaces closing and opening. They can feel muscles transition from mid-range to lengthen range or lengthen to mid-range or any of those sort of things. Generally, these types of movements will be like isolated joint positions. A lot of the time they're isometric focus, so there's not a lot of movement. It's just like holding a position. A lot of the time we're trying to bring muscles towards their mid-range so clients can actually feel the contraction where it's holding. A good example, an example of a sensory-based drill would be something like a hamstring bridge. Dig the heel into something, slight tuck of the pelvis. All of a sudden we get a pretty decent mid-range hamstring contraction or tension. I prefer the word tension. And the client can actually feel that, and they can feel that their hamstring is kind of holding their pelvis in position. We can add reaches, different reach positions, forward reach, overhead reach to drive the rib cage back or to drive the rib cage down, to feel some ab tension starting to build and supporting that as well, oblique tension, whatever it needs to be. But ultimately, that type of movement, very difficult to progress. Eventually, it just becomes like a nothing drill. We're better off moving that to something standing, moving that to something that we can load and progress and move towards the motor end of the continuum. So the motor end is simply just productive training. If sensory is productive learning, feeling things, proprioception, developing context, and building awareness, as you slide people up to the productive end of training, which is the motor end, this is where things become dynamic, things become coordinated, things become progressible, and it just looks like normal good training. And this is where we want to be spending most of the time. One of the key things with this framework is that you only really have to slide down to the sensory end as far as the client requires for you to build the context and build the awareness of what you're actually asking them for. Another big important factor with this sensory motor sort of coaching framework is it's our job as a coach I don't think it's our job to lead this process. I think it's more important that the client does the drills that we're asking them, and then we sort of provide feedback for them specific to what they've given us. So you might do that hamstring bridge and they say, oh, I feel a lot of back tension, fucking blah, 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 whatever it is. Then it's our job to change position and improve it. But it has to be client-led. We can't just go into the drill and tell them, you will feel hamstring, you will feel this, you will do that, because that's just input into them. And all of a sudden, that's probably what they're just going to regurgitate because they don't want to let you down as the coach, or they feel like they're doing something wrong if that's not what you're feeling. So it has to be client-led, this more sensory end of the movement expression. So that's the central sort of coaching framework that we go through, and one of the main application for this movement sort of model that I run through, and obviously the education around it. And in week 5, we go through the lower body application. So developing sensory drills, progressions of drills for clients to feel and challenge them further, hopefully developing context of very specific things that they should be feeling, and we want them to be feeling, and then starting to bleed as much of that into the program as we can through a variety of different positions and movements to allow them to start to develop the skill and expressing that under loads, under high RPEs, under fatigue, and in a variety of different positions. And the application to this, obviously I come from a powerlifting background, but the application for this quite often stems towards like squatting and deadlifting, split squatting, hinging, like your standing based movements. It's not as important for machine based movements. There are some considerations, especially for the compound machines, like an overhead press. Compare that to like a leg extension. It's not going to be as important. But when it comes to squatting and deadlifting, the way that I like to frame this for coaches to understand is that there are technical sort of requirements for squatting and deadlifting that I would call the big rocks. They are the most important things. And these are the things that more often than not is what we're coaching towards. So the big rocks for squatting and deadlifting, the main two are going to be center of mass management. So we're talking about sagittal plane based movement. So it's mainly just going to be forward and back. Obviously there are some people that have little shifts and all of those sort of things, which would be a transverse or a frontal plane management drama. But for the most part, it's sagittal plane is where we have to focus most of our attention when it comes to just basic squatting and deadlifting. So center of mass management is your first big rock, and we'll discuss how that plays and how that looks. The other one for squatting and deadlifting is going to be your axial skeleton position. And the axial skeleton position is what allows us to create and produce a strong brace and manage our internal pressures, both intra-abdominal pressure, intrathoracic pressure, potentially intrapelvic pressure, but just internal pressure management to help us produce force, to maintain a rigid torso, to transverse force or transfer force from the ground into the barbell, into the skeleton, so that we can actually move. Those are the two big rocks for squatting and deadlifting. Deadlifting has a third one, which is kind of this idea that you've got to teach clients to push the world away rather than lift the barbell. We won't get into that today. We're just going to sit with these first two, which is center of mass management, sagittal plane dominant, and then your axial skeleton or your bracing strategy that sits below center of mass management, because if you don't have sagittal plane center of mass management, you probably don't have the skeleton position to manage your brace well. So center of mass is definitely the first big rock. And when it comes to helping clients for performance-based outcomes, all of the small rocks of technique, so small rocks would be your individual expression of technique, would be at an individual level and need to be coached and explored for each of your clients. So an example of a small rock would be something like your foot position for your squats. So I don't believe that there is a gold standard for squatting. However, I do believe that every single person needs to develop the big rock, center of mass sagittal, and this bracing axial skeleton position. All of the small rocks are the individual representations that should, when explored and applied well, move you in the direction of a more productive big rock expression. So an example, foot position. A lot of clients will say, well, should I have my feet straight, like a neutral? If you grew up in the Cali Starrett mobility WOD sort of representation of squatting, everything was on train tracks, fucking feet were straight, knees were straight. Actually, knees were out. Low back was extended, extreme upright, and all of those sort of things. And if you sacrifice that position, you blah, 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 whatever the narratives were around that point in the industry. But this foot position, I don't have the answer of where your feet should be. I don't have the answer, and I think nobody has the answer. Should they be straight? Should they be turned out 5 degrees, 10 degrees, 20 degrees? Should they be wider than the hips? Should they be narrower? Should they be whatever, heel raise or a flat? All of these to me are what I would call small rock considerations, which means We need to explore them. We need to try different strategies, but ultimately the pass or fail of these things would be an improvement of the big rock representation. So if you've got somebody that is squatting decently just neutral, feet are straight, kind of directly underneath them, but that position, by moving them towards that internal rotation space, that position all of a sudden means that their ability to manage their center of mass sagittally is compromised. What that would look like would be they struggle to hit depth because their ankle runs out of room, their hip runs out of room, they shift forward in space, potentially they shift backwards coming out of the hole, potentially they all of a sudden have to extend their trunk to access the bottom position. All of these situations, if we bring their feet closer, if we bring and try a more neutral stance, if all of these situations start to demand or express a poorer representation of sagittal plane center of mass, we're walking down the wrong path for their particular expression of the squat. Conversely, if you open them up, move them to the ER space, you move their toes out, you bring their feet a little wider, you might even cue them to open up their hips on the down phase, like a slight knee out. But that allows them to manage their center of mass better, and all of a sudden the squat looks more vertical. All of a sudden they can access the deeper ranges better. All of a sudden they can express this sagittal plane center of mass management significantly more confident. They feel more comfortable. They can express it more. They can challenge themselves more. They can push their RPEs harder. They can forget about the technique expression that we're demanding from them, because they can just focus on the output and the performance end of the spectrum. That might be the position that they need to express more of. And this is ultimately just the coaching process for most performance-based things, where we've got a couple of things that we're working towards. We've got a couple of things that hold the gold standard for us in terms of technique expression. But all of the smaller processes that allows each individual person to express that, they actually need to be explored at the individual level. Because a lot of them, in fact, all of the small rocks are quite often the things that the clients actually will ask the coach in terms of their question. Some more examples of small rock sort of expressions within the squat would be something like, do I break with my knees or my hips first? I can guarantee that one of those strategies is going to allow you to manage your center of mass significantly more. Just in the mentorship this week, Ryan asked a great question with one of his clients. She was kind of diving her knees forward. She struggles with squat depth. She kind of initiates the squat by diving the knees forward, all of a sudden runs out of kind of ankle range, and then the squat depth just isn't expressed there. What we chatted about, and hopefully we get some feedback over the next week, was maybe getting her to experience a little bit more of a sit back, a little bit more of a hinge, or a little bit more hip loading before the knees actually start to dive forward in space. And I would imagine that that's actually going to allow her to squat deeper. But that cue would not be something that I would recommend all people use to improve their squat depth. What matters for squatting deep is your sagittal center of plane management. So your forward and back shifting in space, and how we manage that, how we control that. And then the second one is going to be the axial skeleton, the brace position. So any of these small rocks, foot position, should I use heels or flats? Should I break at the knees or the hips first? Where should my head be looking? Should I look down? Should I look up? Should I have my hands closer or wider, or any of those sort of things? Like, all of those decisions, all of those small rock decisions need to be explored at the individual level. And they all need to feed in a positive direction for managing center of mass in the sagittal plane, and then also managing their brace position. The reason that the brace position is secondary and the same goes with deadlifting. The reason that the brace position is secondary to center of mass is because we know that center of mass, if center of mass is mismanaged, that the nervous system is reactive to center of mass position in space. So if we have a leading mass movement, so we have a momentum in one direction, we have a transition from heel through midfoot towards the toe, or any of those sort of things, we know that there's going to be a systemic response of the nervous system, specifically the muscular system or the neuromuscular system, to control and manage that forward motion, that forward shift, that momentum in one direction. It's going to be a reactive tension response to manage that, and this is where extension is going to start to drive into the system. This would be where a rib cage starts to drift forward. We're going to pick up a lot more back tension, erector tension. We might even drive towards like an aggressive anterior tilt. All of these like proximal structures are going to start to reposition to manage this forward center of mass. Another key one is going to be the head kicking back into extension. That is a strategy to manage a forward mass. Another key one for squatting specifically is elbows diving behind the person. So quite often, or not quite often, but sometimes you'll see people that they'll squat down, they look really stacked. As soon as they go to initiate and push, all of a sudden the elbows dive behind them and their neck extends. To me, that is a strategy to manage what is underneath the hood, a forward shift of center of mass. They've whether or not they're aware of it or not, what's happening under the hood is that they're actually drifting forward in space. You could almost pair that with there's going to be a forward shift in their foot pressure. That's another key thing that you're looking for with just center of mass sagittal plane, is that there's going to be a forward drift of foot pressure. So potentially heels would come off, not because it's an ankle dorsiflexion limitation, but just by nature of mass is moving forward, which means foot pressure is shifting forward, and eventually the heels are just going to start to rise off the ground. All of those responses are simply just a response. Most of the technical breakdown of most people squatting is a response of this forward shift of center of mass when they execute the squat. So a lot of the times, all the coaching needs to be supporting that big rock. And I remember a few years ago, because I do believe that technique expression is individual. Like I definitely believe that. And I believe that, I'm a movement optimist. Absolutely, that you can just like challenge positions, train positions over time. The structures and the muscles and the soft tissues will develop strength and capacity in those positions. Absolutely, but I'm also a movement realist, and what I mean with this is that you would be naive to think that some positions are just more efficient to produce force and create force and produce downforce in order to lift up. Like that's just true. There's a reason that when you go and look at the world stage of whatever pursuit of performance it is, most people are representing a very, very similar technique at the highest levels of all performance. Yes, there will be specific small adjustments for the individual, and potentially injury history would feed into that. Some structural things will feed into that. Maybe the just training process in general would feed into that. But if you boiled it down, the elites are all expressing this exact kind of same golden archetype. And I'm just realist about that, in that, yeah, we can go and feel and play around with all of these positions, but if we're not moving in the direction of something that's kind of like the gold standard, I do believe you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So for me, that falls within the big rocks. And I've harped on them a lot, but it's for squatting and deadlifting, it's just going to be your forward and back mass management. What that represents like is finding a good brace position, more than likely shifting your rib cage backwards in space in the setup, not just letting it fall forward, fly forward all the time, finding ab wall tension, obliques and abs combined. Some people would need more obliques, some people would need more rectus, but for the most part, we want a shared tension across the wall. So holding your rib cage back in space, creating a really good abdominal brace that comes after this small inhale, this diaphragm descension to manage your internal pressure. But if we can set that position, axial skeleton is shifted back, we're balanced with our foot pressure, which means it doesn't shift from heels to the forefoot, or it doesn't shift from the forefoot towards the heel at any point in the lift. If we're trying to lift things up, the best way to do that is to push straight down through the foot. So we probably want a balanced foot pressure in some representation. Yes, some people might be slightly biased to the heels. Some people might be slightly biased to the forefoot. However, for the most part, we need those 3 points of contact in contact with the ground throughout the entire movement. And the foot pressure, the sensory feedback and foot pressure, and what we're visually looking at within the squatting process or technique analysis process is that the foot pressure looks consistent. It's not shifting and shunting. It's not driving forward. It's not shifting back. It's not the tibias pull back before the hips start to rise. That's a pullback of center of mass. You leave your hips back there as the shins pull back. That's shifting to the heels. That's going to see a big forward shift of your trunk, or you're going to see a big flexion strategy of your trunk to counteract that backward shift. It's not a forward shift. It's not diving to the bottom, driving to the front of the foot, and then all of a sudden everything moves forward and up and around. That's your classic forward bar path. But again, fixing the bar path is not the problem. Fixing your mass management so that the bar path all of a sudden looks more vertical. You don't go and force this bar path representation and trying to get people to squat with a vertical bar path. The bar path is the output of the mass position. So when the bar path is moving forward, that means mass is moving forward. But also in lighter squats, that forward shift of the bar path might be counteracting the backward shift of the hips and the trunk as you go down into the squat. So using the bar path is the incorrect thing. What you should be using is the balanced foot pressure, which is sagittal plane center of mass. That is by far the biggest rock. And if you can just fix this sagittal plane thing, it might be changing a setup, it might be changing a foot position, it might be changing a rib cage in space, it might be changing your bracing strategy slightly, it might be changing what you're feeling in terms of your brace and your ab tension and all of those sort of things. If you can improve those things, and by nature of doing that, you get a more balanced foot pressure, a more balanced vertical mass movement with less of this forward and backward shifting, that is the direction of squat coaching that you need. All of the small rocks should be supporting that in some way. So that's what we've been chatting about this week. Obviously, there's a bunch of sensory drills to get people up to feel that thing. But that's a little insight of what we're going through with this week. If you're interested in the next intake of the Movement Mentorship, links are down below. We've got 2 coaches in there already, one returning. I've put out, actually, that's a really good point. I've put out a return offer for anyone that was part of intakes 1 through, technically it's 4. The people in intake 5 will gain access to the Discord, and they won't need to go through the course again because I've revamped it as we've gone through this intake. But they will get immediate access into the Discord. But anybody from intakes 1 through 4. So basically, if you did the course or the mentorship in 2025 or 2024 in one of those first 4 intakes, I think there's about 150 coaches out there. If you're still listening, if you're still applying, if you're still keen to learn and dive a bit deeper again and see the updated material, see the updated work, jump into more of the programming side of things, I threw out a $1,000 discount because it's 1,500 Aussie dollars now to do the mentorship as I push into this new direction as my full-time work. I need to increase that. I do believe it's worth probably double that ultimately. Like when I look at some other courses out there and some other people that are in this space, like I believe it holds its own in terms of value and what I provide in the course. But there has been a pretty significant price increase for the movement mentorship, just as I build out my business model. But yeah, if you're part of those first 4 intakes, so 24 or 25, any of those intakes, I threw out an email last week for $1,000 off. It brings the price down to $500 to jump back in, retake the course, get all of the updates, and also jump in the new Discord for where I'm going to have as the central hub of all of my products and services rolling through there in order to hopefully provide more ongoing support long term. So if you're interested in that, just message me or check your emails from last week. I'll probably send a few more. I had a couple of questions asked about that discount for the previous returning coaches. It's open until the intake starts, which I think is June 2nd or anything like that. So don't feel like you're obligated to jump in straight away if you do want. Obviously, I would love to see your name pop up. I can reach back out and we can chat. But yeah, if you are a new coach to my world, The next movement mentorship, the pre-learning kicks off in May. It's gone through a huge update this intake and over the last 6 months, just building things in behind the scenes. There's more programming stuff coming in. There's more application. It's just a better service, better model in general. After teaching it for close to 200 people over the last couple of years. So yeah, if you're keen, it'll be one of the main links down below. The next thing is we had some questions and discussions that popped up with the joint mobility from last week. So let me get the visuals up because this is a visual podcast. If you're new here, please subscribe. My mental health is dependent on it. Last week, let's go here. I'm definitely getting better with good old OBS, which is nice. I did these 2 videos last week. So we had mobility limiters and gait cycle. That was the podcast last week. And we were talking about some of the gait cycle representations of center of mass relative to base of support. So the 3 key ones, center of mass is behind the base. So it's going to be your early foot sort of presentation, which is a supinated ER foot. As center of mass moves directly on top of the base of support, that's where most of our force production stuff is going to be happening. We're starting to push down to lift things up. That's where your pronations are going to start to come in. That's where some of your distal internal rotation starts to come in. That's where some of your medial foot pressure stuff should be biased. And then obviously as center of mass moves over the front of the base of support, we get this resupination of the foot and this distal ER that begins to drive back up. And we're chatting about mobility limiters specific to the foot and the ankle, and specifically dorsiflexion, and how I think we were no, that was in the actual roasting the followers, which again I was enjoying that. If you want your technique roasted, I'm very happy with running through those. If you want your technique, if you want some technique help, send me a bunch of videos and what you're working towards. And if it's something that I'm happy to do publicly and you're happy to do it publicly, I'll definitely offer you some value with that. But in this video, in this dorsiflexion, this is not a dorsiflexion issue with Matt. He was talking about on his left foot, he gets this closing joint space sort of drama. He feels like a little bit of a pinch or a little bit of a bony block. And I was discussing how part of the dorsiflexion moment, part of this pronation moment is the foot should flatten and the arches should drop. And we should see the navicular drop down and the talus sort of drop down and the rear foot sort of slide backwards in space to allow the tibia to continue to move forward. And if that doesn't occur, more than likely what is happening is that the foot is staying in a supinated representation. The arch is staying high. And we're starting to get this bony block here at the front of the foot. If that is the case, it is not a dorsiflexion problem. It is not your ability for your tibia to move on your talus. More than likely, it is actually a coupled motion of your ability to flatten the foot through pronation and allow the loading to transition from heel to the forefoot across the bridge of the foot, more specifically to the big toe. That was the central point of some of those conversations. But I had a question from one of my clients, Scott, who asked, he said, are there any other sort of positions or ideas within the body that would be specific to him? And I'll just open this up specific to anyone. Where this bone positional sort of understanding makes the most sense, and that the feeling is going to be that when you're closing a joint position, another classic one is hip flexion. So if you're going into hip flexion and that feeling, the block is all at the front of the hip. There is no like stretching sensation of anything on the backside. It kind of just hits a block and stops. That would be another situation where this bone position, these bone orientations need to support the representation or the movement, the mobility that we're trying to build or express a little bit better. Another classic one is going to be for shoulder flexion. So getting the arm up overhead. Obviously, to get the arm up overhead, we need the scapula to support that, which means the scapula probably needs to move through a protraction arc. So it's going to have to slide forward in some capacity, and it's going to have to slide upwards and point the glenoid to the ceiling in some capacity. It's going to look like a protraction and an upward rotation. It's going to look like potentially a posterior or hopefully a posterior tilt if we access full shoulder flexion. But if the scapula, for whatever reason, can't support that, we are probably going to be limited and feel a closing joint issue, drama. Let's just call it a drama. So it's going to feel like, I don't want to call it an impingement because the research is heavily moving in the direction of it's a pretty shitty narrative being impingement, but it's probably going to be something on the front side of the shoulder, something on the lateral side of the shoulder. As you're trying to move your arm up, there's not enough sort of relative motion through scapthoracic. There's not a foundational sort of position of your rib cage to support the scapula moving, and that doesn't actually allow the arm to access that overhead position. So that would probably be the other most common one. So this mobility restriction, this closing joint position, this just block that most people, or not most people, but people that are trying to improve their mobility quite often, if we're just forcing our way through those blocks, through those closing joint angles, we're probably not actually achieving what we want. What we should be hopefully be able to set up is an understanding of, what do I need to do for the bones? And in these cases, what do I need to do with the foot to allow the tibia to move forward? What do I need to do for the pelvis to allow the femur to lift up? And what do I need to do at the thorax or the scapula to allow the arm to access that range? We should be first exploring and doing some sensory work to achieve those things before then you go all the way and hopefully get a stretching sensation that begins to limit on the opening side, or the tissues that are lengthening to allow you to access that end range. Because with Matt and then Scott, they were just two good conversations that I've had in the last week surrounding some of the content. And as always, if you have questions, just let me know. If you're following along, there's a very good chance that I'm going to answer it in, whether it be a YouTube video or the podcast or even an Instagram post, and I'll send it to you, because they're all good questions and they're the things that ultimately coaches and lifters are trying to better understand. So hopefully that helps you boys. The final thing, as a little recap just in my life, so we're done with the technical chat. Again, if you're following along, drop a like, subscribe, share on socials, whatever it needs to be. Help me out. If the final thing is just a recap of life. I'm so incredibly stressed right now. I don't know what's happened in the well, I know exactly what's happened. I can tell you exactly what's happened and we'll get into it. But first couple of months, rolling, doing things, fucking blah, blah, blah. I think the first domino that fell, the first like canary in the coal mine, was my social media content. I was pumping 10 posts a week. I think I've probably been averaging like 4 posts a week in the last month. And I was down about myself a little bit, but then I'm like, actually, I have a lot going on right now. So obviously, we're in week 5 of the mentorship, so we're almost wrapped that up. But I've got the new private course with One Playground that kicked off 2 weeks ago. That was stressing me out a little bit because it's a whole new system and whole new process that I'm going through. Trying to get everyone in the Discord, trying to give them their own roles and all of this sort of stuff. Like, that's been a challenge. They're the first group going through it. But then the other side of that has been these 2 workshops in Sydney, which is fantastic. There's always going to be tickets available for the open one, which is Saturday. That will be linked down below for sure. If you do want to come to that, final call. But I've got these 2 workshops and I really want to do like really well with them. So I've been producing all the slides and setting up the slides and the structure and all of that sort of stuff. That's going on. And then the third piece that's just more than anything stressing me out is this bloody lease of the building. I found a new gym that I'm going to go to, which is going to be awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Great space, and I'm keen to sort of run through. I might do a little vlog of my new space when it's all set up over there. But that's one of the things. Obviously, I'm moving. But the second thing is I am obviously leasing this building that I bought 4 or 5 years ago to have my gym here and close the gym, and I've just been leasing it to myself, paying an exorbitant rent just to run this thing, which is fine. The risk you take when you invest. There's going to be downturns, but we've got a tenant. They should be starting on April 1st. We're going back and forth. Solicitors have looked at the contracts and all of that. We're all good. There's just a couple of small things that they have not questioned, but just want clarification on. But the problem that is stressing me is that they don't speak English. So every time that there's a response, or they ask a bunch of questions, like we've got to word it in a very easy way that it doesn't get like lost in translation, I guess, and be very particular with how we're framing things and saying things. There's been a couple of conversations with one person on our side that can speak their language from the estate agent, but it's just added this whole new curveball. And what probably should have been sorted out 2 weeks ago, it's still just slowly moving in the direction of. I'm very confident that it's going to happen because they've started the permit process and changing all of those things. They've asked for floor plans to change some of the structure of the internal walls and all of that sort of stuff, which is all fine. Like I'm fine with that. It's a good lease, and I think they're going to be really good tenants. But it's just delayed it and dragged it. I was kind of hoping that it would be finished this week, but it's still going on, and hopefully by the weekend it's all signed, sealed, delivered, and I can actually take an exhale, relax, calm the nervous system down, and just move on from this. Because I've kind of felt like, especially in the last month, I'm kind of in limbo where I've made the decision. I know where I'm going. I'm 99.9% sure the tenants are happening and all that thing's going on, but it's just like I'm just kind of caught here, and it's just all like it's all on my lap at the same time, which is fine. This is what I want to do with work, and I'm not complaining in any way. It's just that I'm feeling some stress right now and feeling that pressure. But other than that, I think we might wrap it up there. I don't know if there's anything else. If you made it all the way to the end, drop a like, drop a comment, drop something. If there's a topic or an idea that you want me to unpack on the podcast or a YouTube video or even an Instagram post, just let me know. Send me a DM. Happy to chat in the DMs. If you want your technique roasted, this was a really good one. I was really happy with this this Matt Cahill one. What did we go through? We went through obviously this dorsiflexion idea and clearing that up. I messaged him just before to see how he was going. Let me see what he actually said. Been doing the pronation, practicing my shift of the weight from heel to forefoot, getting the foot to flatten. Had a couple of weeks. He's been focusing on it, really trying to find the position where the backside sensation compared to the front side. So he's starting to learn and explore his joint positions a lot more, which is fantastic. He said he's going to send me some more training videos. So we might even do a little recap, depending on where we go through. But this one, we looked at some squatting stuff. There's some center of mass ideas within this. So if you're keen to look at that a little bit further, plank with reach is going to come up a lot. One of my favorite sensory drills to improve these positions, especially as it pertains to squatting and deadlifting. I know we didn't chat about deadlifting. Maybe we can chat about deadlifting. If you can, we can unpack the big rocks of deadlifting. We went through some reaching based stuff and then just looked at some of his accessories, which are ultimately pretty strong, pretty good. So yeah, check that out if you want. If you want your technique roasted, send me some videos and ask for help. Other than that, I'll shut up now. Movement Mentorship Intake 6, links down below. If you're a returning coach, check your emails or send me a DM if you want to get back involved. $500, you're back in, full course, new Discord server, better online support, ongoing support. If you want to come to the Sydney workshop, that is also available. That will be linked down below. It's this Saturday though, 28th of March. Human movement principles. Plenty of ribcage stuff, plenty of foot stuff, plenty of pelvis stuff, plenty of sensory drills, plenty of coaching strategies. We'll probably talk about squatting and deadlifting because most people do want to use that for application. But yeah, very, very keen. Scapular work is going to be in there, reaches and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, if you're still listening, I appreciate you and we'll see you next week.